It's March the 29th, 2019. This is 508, a show about Worcester. I'm Mike Benedetti. This is Brendan Melican.
What's up, brother?
Hi, Brendan. How are you doing?
I'm well. You know, the favorite part of my week, every week, is watching you and producer extraordinaire Gabby communicate to each other after you both have put on your headphones and nobody can hear anything because the mics aren't live. It really warms my heart. Yeah, I love this.
Yes, it's a lot of fun. This radio show is a lot of fun.
We devolve into sign language. There's all sorts of stuff going on.
This week on 508, we're going to talk about election news. We're going to talk about economic development news, and we're going to talk about cultural news.
So if you haven't been sleeping well lately, now would be the time to just take a nap and kick back.
Brendan, to a first-order approximation, everyone in the city of Worcester is running for school committee this year.
This is true. There are actually more people running for school committee than voted in our last municipal election cycle.
And it's often pointed out that if everybody who's currently pulled papers for this actually ends up running, we'll have the first preliminary election in the school committee in generations. But usually what happens is a lot of people pull papers and then change their mind.
Yes.
By the final filing date, but we will likely have a lot of challengers this year, unlike in past years.
Yeah.
For years now, Brendan, for decades, really, I've been actively trying to avoid understanding the Worcester School Committee, knowing the names of the people on it, knowing what they do, and this is the year that I might have to change.
Yeah, you're actually going to do some homework now.
We might have to interview them on the show, and I might have to ask them some questions. So if people at home, I want to ask you, what do you want the candidates to be discussing as they compete for votes? We could be talking on here about, who hates the other one more, Dante or Brian O'Connell, who's sexier, Dante or Brian O'Connell. We could ask those kind of questions. But for this show, because this is a show that, for me, is a show for nerds, I want to say, what issues do you want to hear people discussing as they compete for votes? We'll come up with our list of 6 questions or whatever it ends up being, and then we'll have everybody who wants to come in, and we'll ask them those questions. And those interviews have tended to be pretty good, at least as far as I think revealing what that person would be like.
I think it actually falls into the bucket of stuff that we've done over the years that actually not only lasts, it continues to hold its own, but I think some of those interviews have become more valuable over time. Like
the only good interview ever with Mike Gaffney, I think.
Like we did that. Yeah.
Yes, we did.
I'm not
true.
Tooting our own horns, but I think that's one of the funny things that I think we're used to on sort of like a national level, like a soundbite sort of setup and algorithm for deciding who you're going to vote for. On a local level, that's really weird, right? Because you can conceivably run into these people like walking down the street. Like I can't remember a day that went by that didn't run into at least one elected official.
Yes.
So it's like the idea that we wouldn't want to fully flesh out these conversations because they're so accessible, but that doesn't seem to be something most people are interested in. It seems like we're debates with prepared questions and interviews that can fit into a set column length.
Well, I understand that campaigns they do what works. They realize that the media and the electorate both have a pretty limited bandwidth for thinking about the school committee this year.
You know who doesn't have limited bandwidth, Mike?
Who's that?
You and I.
We don't have a limited bandwidth. And if you also don't have a limited bandwidth, we will be your pipeline to these guys. I mean, obviously you can run into them on the street, but we will run into them on the street and confront them and ask them 6 questions.
I already know what my metric is for voting for school committee members this year,
though.
Though. Well, no, so it seems like since the law department actually had to get involved and explain to the Worcester City Council members that they're not school committee members and they don't actually get to have a say in the school committee, I'm only going to vote for school committee members that are looking to affect change on the municipal side of things. So if I want to hear school committee members talking about streets and sidewalks. I want to hear their opinions on the appropriate size of a recycling bin and whether or not that bin should have wheels and or lids. I think those are all the things that we should focus on for school committee this year.
Here's the question I'm going to ask people running for city council, because really the Worcester City Council just time and time again decides to take votes on school committee issues. Nobody knows why they do this all the time. There's plenty of municipal stuff they could worry about, but they don't worry about it. I do want to ask all the challengers for city council, are you aware that you have signed up to run for the city council and not the school committee?
Yeah.
Let's just confirm that.
Yeah.
Because people, the form might be confusing. I never filled it out. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a job description somewhere, but who knows if they've actually been religious in issuing that.
Well, you were pointing out, again, there's been lots of drama on the school committee of people insulting each other or whatever in recent weeks, which whatever. If you want to see people insult each other, there's better shows than the school committee, I think. You were pointing out that Dante Comparetto really seems to be doing a full court press in terms of just overwhelming the school committee with a raw number of items,
yes.
motions, agenda items. So I've really never looked at the school committee agenda before, so I started this week, and rather than looking at the content of anything, I'm just trying to understand big picture.
Sure.
So here's the numbers on it. So most of these agenda items on the agenda for March 21st were co-sponsored, 3, 4, 5 people listed on these agenda items. The mayor, for example, Joe Petty, is on 6 agenda items, and they're all co-sponsored. Brian O'Connell is listed on 26 agenda items, 9 of them teamed with Dante. The other one, none of them just by him on his lonesome. Jack Foley's on only 3, all co-sponsored. Giant Biancaria, 16 all co-sponsored. Molly McCullough, 17 all co-sponsored. John Manfredo, 17 all co-sponsored. And Dante, 20, 9 as previously stated with Brian O'Connell,
sure.
And 9 of them solo. So really, the only person with any solo items, and he's got 9 of them on there. Nice
I think, can we make an assumption then that maybe all of this kerfuffle, the back and forth between Brian O'Connell and Dante is sort of a manufactured conflict?
It's like Jimmy Superfly Snuka and Roddy Piper. I mean, they hate each other. So why is it that they have so many co-signed agenda items? You would almost think that these two guys are actually good friends off camera.
Yeah, I'm not buying it. It does kind of. So who would their characters be in wrestling? Who would Dante be?
I'm going to say there's no real reason for this, but I'm going to say Jim Cornette.
Jim Cornette.
Yeah.
That's an interesting pick.
I'm just feeling it.
Brian O'Connell.
I'm trying to. Who am I thinking of? I'm really having a hard time. Junkyard Dog, I guess. I don't know. I'm not seeing any real. I mean, none of those guys ever talked about education policy, so there's not like a clear connection between what wrestler is the most Brian O'Connell like on whatever.
Why was
sex
there
ed.
never anyone talking about education policy as a wrestling trope? I don't. Yeah.
In economic development news, Worcester Magazine had the best article on the Midtown Mall I've ever seen.
All right.
Did you see this article?
I did not yet.
It's called "It Takes a Village: Tenants See Opportunity in Midtown Mall." This is by Walter Bird.
Well, this is from last week.
This is from a couple weeks back.
Yeah, I did see this one. Yep.
Yeah, I thought this was good. I feel like very heavy on the anecdotes, but
sure,
I feel like everything about the Midtown Mall, honestly, is very heavy on the anecdotes.
Of course
because
it is.
The owner never goes on record to say anything.
Which is the whole story, right? I mean, everybody in the city of Worcester has a take on what they know to be happening with the Midtown Mall. It's probably the best example in recent memory of like the only thing that matters is not what you believe, but all the nuance that you're not aware of. To your point, I mean, nobody talks to Dean Marcus because Dean Marcus doesn't talk to anybody about his property. So we make assumptions about what his intentions are, right, wrong, or indifferent. We rarely interact with the tenants that have come and gone over the decades down there and whatnot.
He's kind of like the ultimate warrior in that he's a big presence downtown, but he doesn't like say sentences in public. So you really don't know what's in the ultimate warrior's head.
Yeah, and you're probably going to be surprised by it, but either way.
Well, everything I've ever read about the Midtown Mall, honestly, it's one of 2 articles. It's an article which either says the government wants to tear it down, or it's an article which says that some business in the Midtown Mall was involved in some shady dealings, drug dealing, money laundering, whatever. This is an article which says, here's like the people who have these businesses, and there's like a bunch of them, and they seem like nice people, and they tell some stories to Walter Bird. Good job, Walter Bird. Good job, Worcester Magazine.
One of the things that I think is really interesting about that in particular, though, is so like I'm not a big fan. I can't think of many contexts that I would actually just come out and say, "Yay, eminent domain!" Right? Like it's a hard thing to be like a fan of.
Yes,
but it is one of those things that like we're not just pulling out of thin air. Like we have a Fifth Amendment to the Constitution and whatnot, something that's been heard quite a bit by the Supreme Court, even in recent years, in terms of streamlining government's right to take property. As long as compensation is just. It's kind of interesting to see how people talk about eminent domain as though it's not a thing that actually exists. Like on the one hand, we'll talk about like a property owner's right to do whatever they want with their property, while completely ignoring that government has an enumerated right to do what it wants with property, as long as they're compensating people for it.
So, Brendan, despite the fact that Walter Bird wrote a charming story about the Midtown Mall, and despite the fact that it seems like every time you talk to the common man or the common politician, they have a real soft spot for the Midtown Mall.
Yeah.
The WRA continues to say, for reals, guys, for reals this time. No more fake outs like for the last however many decades. For reals, we're going to eminent domain this.
Right.
The WRA is like a quasi-governmental bureau.
It's an authority.
Authority, right? So, like, those guys can be fired?
It has a board.
Yes. Yes, okay. But they're not, like, elected. They're C-elected.
Right.
Okay.
They're appointed.
So if people want to put pressure on the WRA one way or another, the WRA feels that very indirectly?
Yeah, sure, I guess. I mean,
because you lean on the governor or somebody, and
I guess we would have to be genuine here and say, what kind of pressure does anybody feel in public life in Worcester? If we even when it comes to elected officials, how many people are showing up to vote? Right, like we're not talking. If we're worried about torches and pitchforks, it's not a large number of torches and pitchforks.
I'll tell you this: in my experience, our elected officials in Worcester have very vivid imaginations, and that if Joe Petty was like going to vote on the Midtown Mall, and you walked up to him and you were like, "If you vote for this, I won't like you," in his mind, that will be magnified to like 1,000 people across the city of Worcester pointing fingers at him. This is one reason that all the politicians in Worcester listen to this show, because they think that somehow 1,000 people in Worcester agree also with this show.
Yeah.
But I feel like if you go up to...
We were creating influence bubbles before it was cool,
who's
Mike.
on the WRA? Vincent Pedoni? Some people like
Chair,
that?
yeah.
Yeah. So like if you go up to him and say you don't like him, he's going to be like, I don't care.
That's exactly what, yeah.
All right. That's a different kind of a thing.
But he would have said that to you while he was an elected official as well.
I would say in other economic development news this week, the WRTA said they're not going to raise bus fare because they're assuming that the state is going to just give them more money. Their goal, this is an article by Cyrus Moulton from the Telegram and Gazette. They say, you know what, if we get $88 million in funding, we'll be fine. And the RTA task force wants Worcester to get $90.5 million in funding from the state. WRTA is like, that would be great. That would be perfect. Actual budget this year, $82 million, plus a one-time grant of $6 million.
All right.
So, so they're just like, we're not going to raise any transit figures in anticipation of things just working out okay. I mean, bus fares also don't cover that much of the bottom line, as we talked about on this show before.
Yeah.
So I feel a little confused by the financing on this article, but there you go. So, but that's good. It's a little optimism around transit funding.
It's not going to get worse.
Yeah.
That's
good job, Dennis Lipka, new WRTA head.
Holden man, right?
Holden man. Definitely. I mean, I'm not going to say definitely Holden man. I mean, he is from Holden, but I don't know if he's Holden man per se, like Florida man. The Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce is complaining about National Grid because it says that National Grid is just a pain in the neck to work with.
All right.
And it's slowing down a bunch of development projects. This makes me think about the sort of bigger question, which is, do you think that the city of Worcester should ever invest in like really repairing any of our infrastructure, or we should just continue to wait for that once in 50-year flood or once in 50-year surge in the gas mains or whatever that just blow out all of our pipes or blow out all of the blow up all the houses?
I mean, so electric, I guess, is probably a better one to start with than gas, right? But because but it's similar, and I think the easiest one is anything involving telecom, right? Like the really crappy thing, and I think this is probably where the chamber is coming from in some way, is we actually already are paying those up, those costs for infrastructure upgrade, right? Like we started doing that when it comes to telco back in the mid '90s. And none of the upgrades have been done, right? Like it's been done a combination of fees that you pay as a consumer. Every bill that you get from Charter Communications or your phone company has fees that are specifically earmarked for upgrades. If you talk to Verizon, they'll say, well, that's what we did with Fios, but not really. At the same time, there was also massive waves of cash that started rolling out from the top down, from the federal side, back in the 90s, that also were not spent the way they were intended, which was supposed to be for upgrades. Like, if we're talking about true municipal services and whatnot, like say like the water pipes and whatnot, or sewage pipes, like that's a really, really big problem. But we're talking about private companies that are maintaining a lot of these services and whatnot, and that are pretty stingy about who else can use them and, hang something on a pole or whatever the case may be. So, yeah, I don't think there's any question that we should be really putting the wood to these companies all the time when it comes to upgrading services. Like, I'm horrified that in Worcester, like, we still have above-ground power lines, right? Like, It's at least once a decade that you'll have a neighborhood that's without power for a month or a week or whatever after a big storm. And it's like we act surprised by that. It's like then you drive into almost any neighboring community, and anytime a major either new development or they're getting an overhaul of existing infrastructure, they sink their utilities, right? Because we live in New England, and sometimes in New England, weather is harsh, and things like ice and wind and trees happen, and but however long electricity on poles has existed, somehow this has escaped the logic of the companies that we put in charge of maintaining those services. I find it abhorrent, Mike.
Where on your list of municipal priorities would infrastructure repair be?
It's super high, but I think it's on the federal level. Again, where would you even find in a starting point in Worcester for that?
Can the city of Worcester doesn't really have any juice to lean on National Grid and say, "Hey guys, get your act together vis-a-vis Worcester"?
I think they totally do, but I honestly don't know why they choose not to. To be honest with you, I don't.
Well, so this is where my question is leading. Is do you feel like this is an issue that we could ask city councilors?
Oh, absolutely.
About this year?
And so any city councilor that's out there that is planning on running on environmental issues, right? Like, because I feel like that's something that is likely to become a trend this year, is starting to hear local officials begin speaking to matters like climate change, right? Like and we've already started to hear that, even though the campaign cycle hasn't formally begun. I'll be honest, I think that's kind of missing the point entirely, right? Because you can't take something that's that high level and bring it down to the local level in a way that can fully grasp the enormity of the problem that's being discussed, right? It's the right problem to discuss, but it's such an enormous problem on a local level. I think it's really hard to get everybody on a very granular way in agreement on like what we can do locally to be like the force that stops this global problem.
Yeah. Yes.
But where we can do that is dealing with things like natural gas companies and electric companies. We haven't found solutions to make them go away as energy providers and move to next generation energy sources. So in the meantime, we should just be beating them up any time we possibly can.
There's another economic development news thing that's pretty big, which is that Mo Bergman, and I'll say Mo Bergman, Mo problems, but not in this case, Mo Bergman is doing another one of his pushes on zoning changes. He's been doing this for years on the city council. I'm always proud of him. He's always trying to do something around parking or requirements or whatever. And this time he's saying, you know what, the Four Unrelated People deal, I guess you could say the Three Unrelated People deal. This is the thing where if you've got four unrelated people living in a residence, like you're a rooming house, and suddenly a whole slew of regulations come down on your head. Yeah. And if you're not a rooming house and you have those people, you're in big trouble, buddy.
Right.
Obviously, a ton of people in Worcester violate this, and the city is pretty happy to look the other way in certain circumstances. But I think also, obviously, like frequently the solution to somebody's housing problem is get a roommate. Yeah. And there's plenty of places which are like kind of a good place for four unrelated people to live in. But you can't do it legally. And so certain landlords are going to shy away from this, and people are not going to make improvements that would let you do it. Mo says, you know what, I want to have a municipal ordinance that says you can do it. You can do it in certain circumstances. You got to be like, it has to be like an apartment. It can't be like a house. It needs to be in like certain areas that are zoned for, a little higher density residential already. Yeah. And you would have to like ask the city for a little variance or a little whatever for this. So that there could be there'd be a meeting, but in front of the whatever board, the zoning board, and your neighbors would come out and say, we like you four people who are unrelated, or we hate you four people who are unrelated, or whatever. And then that unit would be allowed to do that. Yeah. This just seems like kind of it feels like an obvious thing to me. Like it feels like a law that I don't understand I don't really understand what the benefit could be. It may be the kind of thing that if this law went away, I would suddenly realize what the benefit would be, and mere anarchy would be loosed upon Worcester. But that's not my view right now.
No, I honestly don't get why that ordinance exists in the first place. I mean, I'm sure it's probably similar to when you stated that most city councilors live in this fantasy world where if one person tells them they don't like them, they assume that means there's thousands of people who are ready to fight them. I mean,
to be fair, we all sort of live in this fantasy world. Like if anybody posts a YouTube comment on the YouTube of this and says this show sucks, that one person will decide that was every single person who saw it also agrees with that person.
That's true. Do you read comments?
Oh, you know what? I mean, there's a lot of things that I do that I shouldn't do, and that's one of them.
I only do it late at night. Okay. I don't try not to be angry during the day. But I think that's the ordinance is kind of similar, right? Like to your point, whatever that fear of what's going to happen if more than 4 unrelated people live together, maybe there is something that happens. I don't know. It's like that's how Voltron became created. I don't know what could possibly come of.
Boy, we could only hope Voltron
could come out of this. But I also think it seems really absurd that I can't imagine a group of college students, right? That like say like young people getting their first apartment or whatever. They just met because they were organized through their landlord as like I've got 5 bedrooms in this place, whatever. That those are the people that we're going to make come to a municipal meeting to state their case to a zoning board as to why they should be allowed to live together.
To be fair, it's probably going to be their landlord and not the 4 people who come before the zoning board, unless the 4 people happen to own the condo or whatever it ends up being.
It's just dumb. It's a step in the nice direction, but it's dumb.
I mean, I have to say, like, I appreciate that Mo has such a careful approach to this too.
Yeah.
You could say, like, if it is a terrible idea, we will find out quickly, and not a lot of people will have been approved for it by that point, and we can change it back.
I'm not suggesting that what Mo is doing is dumb. I'm saying the point of origin is dumb, that we have this ordinance that bans people, picks an arbitrary number and says this is how many people can live in a dwelling that are unrelated. It doesn't make any sense at all. It's not like we're lacking other ordinances and laws that you could turn around and say, somebody was disturbing the peace because there's 400 people living in a 2-bedroom apartment, right? Like, it's a pretty easy one to suss out, unless there's a genuine concern that I can't imagine, and that must be a really terrible, awful, dark potential if I can't imagine it.
It'll be interesting to see if this happens, how many 4-unit dwellings come about that weren't previously, how many of these 4-person things actually come about that weren't like previously already happening? Are landlords actually enforcing this strongly enough that we'll see a change here, or is this just sort of normalizing, legalizing something that's already, decriminalizing?
I'm just going to add this to my fantasy tick list of things that I will do if I ever win the lottery. Is I'm going to pay a large group of people, we're going to get maybe 100 people, and we're going to get them to marry each other. 50 of them will be married to the other 50 of them, and then we're going to get one half to adopt the non-married half of the other side's now family, and we're going to create a complete artificial statutory family, and we're going to get them all to live in one 3-decker. And I'm going to pay them just to host the biggest, craziest parties imaginable, but only during the day, daylight hours. We'll probably have them parking on the lawns, but we're not going to pave the lawns first. Like, we're going to take a creative way just to poke giant holes that we can drive buses through in every silly ordinance that we have in the city that doesn't accomplish anything, but gives city councilors the opportunity to have their lips flap a lot as we go into an election cycle.
Brent crude oil is $68 a barrel, up 1% on the week. Bitcoin is $4,000, up 2% on the week.
Yeah, finally, Bitcoin
making a comeback,
crawling its way back to somewhere.
In cultural news this week, the art museum has a really nice exhibit of Japanese woodblock prints by Utagawa Hiroshige from his series Famous Views of the 60-odd Provinces. And it's very nice to see. I really love Japanese woodblock printing. Mm-hmm. It's one of my favorite kinds of art. And it's very interesting to see this exhibit, and it was educational for me as somebody who is a little bit of a fan, to learn more of the details of like how they actually did this stuff. Mm-hmm. So it's where there used to be that Monet thing at the art museum. Now they have this Japanese woodblock.
So you already got in to see it?
The woodblocks?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I spent like a long time. I got to spend a long time in there. I was there a day that wasn't crowded. It was nice. Good stuff. That room especially, art museum, you're doing strong work with that one room.
I'll tell you, I waited till I knew there were not going to be any crowds and went like 15 minutes before the museum closed closed from the outside to get in to see the Monet exhibit. That room is fantastic. I mean, the opportunity to stand in the middle of the room and just kind of like slowly, after looking at each piece individually, but just stand in the middle of the room and take them all in without people everywhere. It was just an absolutely overwhelming experience. That room they're doing an incredible job with. The whole museum they're doing a great job with. But yeah, what they keep bringing in as part of rotating galleries has been pretty spectacular.
This month in Happiness Pony, Matt Fox has an article about the Harrington and Richardson M1 rifle, which is a Worcester-made rifle. Do you own any Worcester-made weapons? Are you into that scene? I
had at one point in time, years ago, Car Arms, which is a handgun manufacturer that's up by the airport. If you drive by the airport, the backside, Sileo is the name of the company, from the exterior. But that's car manufacturing, car arms. That is one of the sons of Reverend Sun Myung Moon from the Moonies, owns the manufacturing company up there. And it's a really, really neat story that, like, I almost don't want to... There's a couple great Washington, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and Vice magazine stories about the Reverend Sun Myung Moon's two sons. One of them owns a gun manufacturer here in Worcester. The other runs a militia for Moonies that is, like, heavily armed. And it's really amazing because, like, you have to dig really deep to find journalists on a national level who are tying together these two realities. That, like, over here we've got one son of Reverend Sun Myung Moon, who has declared himself a god, and who needs to be armed and surrounded by heavily armed worshipers to carry out his mission of sorts. And
I feel like that makes you a less impressive god if you've got bodyguards.
It's not. It's not. We grew up in a different tradition, though. And then on the other side, you got the son who's actually making all the guns. It's a pretty fascinating little story, and Mike, all roads lead to Worcester.
So wait, so you do or don't own Worcester-made?
No, not anymore.
guns?
That was years ago. Car arms, but yeah, that was probably about 20 years ago.
Matt, I don't know if Matt owns a Worcester-made M1 or not. This was something which Harrington and Richardson, and they were just over on Park Avenue. They were in different spots.
Yeah, Park and Chandler.
We were trying to figure out exactly like
where
that
the
Walgreens is.
Yep.
Right.
There are some good pictures that you can find. I think there's one even on the Worcester Historical Museum website. Up until somewhat recently, they had a picture of the manufacturing facility over there. Yeah.
Yeah, so they made they had a contract to make M1s for the Korean War, and they didn't actually get them ready for the Korean War, according to Matt, but they did deliver them anyway, and so they were in circulation throughout the army, and to armies like the Ethiopian army, the Greek army, the Filipino army, American allied armies around the world during the Cold War times.
There was also a period of time that that Harrington and Richardson had one of the contracts for the M16s.
Yes.
So there was
the M14.
So there were large numbers of those during the Vietnam era that were in circulation that were, their roll marks were Worcester, Mass. I always thought that'd be kind of cool to find something like that on the market. But yeah, I like things that were made in Worcester.
I mean, there's your Worcester cultural news.
But in contemporary sense, the car arms thing is actually kind of interesting now because one of their jams is to buy smaller companies. So they own one of the primary companies that makes the old 1911 Colt 45. They own the rights to the Tommy gun. And these are all things that if you were to buy...
Wait, this little company owns the right to make Tommy guns?
Yeah. And they're, of course, they're not fully automatic anymore. It's a semi-automatic 45 caliber Tommy gun. But yeah, if you were to find one and they're still pricey, Worcester, Mass, stamped on the side. There are lower end Colt 1911s that are obviously not made by Colt anymore. But the roll marks, Worcester, Mass, right on the side, and it's just like your great grandfather carried in World War I.
Brendan, what are you excited about in Worcester this week?
I'm excited to tell you one last useless weapons anecdote. You know where you would know car arms from?
No.
The first, because there's another one coming out soon, the first Sam Jackson Shaft movie. His character carried two, I believe they were nickel-plated car K9, single stack 9mm, and I think that was the only time I think I've seen one in like a movie or anything. It's a pretty obscure firearm that has like a huge cult following, but whoever was making decisions for Samuel Jackson's, reimagining of Shaft, that's what he was using.
They were just like, Shaft seems like a car arms man.
Seems like it. What am I excited about?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's, I'm really excited about the weather, man. And not for a selfish reason because I'm like in the ice cream game. I'm just excited that I feel like the funk is finally coming off. I walked out my door this morning and I smelt like rotting leaves. It's been so long since I feel like I smelled the planet because it's just been frozen tundra for so long. It was like when it hit me today that there's still things that are living out here, and that was a nice reminder. So hopefully this weekend get up in the 60s. Maybe by next week we'll have the first sign of flowers coming through just in time for it to snow on Wednesday. But we're getting there, and I like it.
Are we ready to wrap up the show?
She was ready to wrap up hours ago, Mike. This is
guys. Thanks for watching 508. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Bye-bye.